First contact in the rain. The rain drummed steadily against the observatory's dome as Thomas Reed adjusted his telescope settings for the 100th time that evening. At 34, he had earned his reputation as one of the most dedicated astronomers at the Black Ridge Mountain Research Center, though his colleagues often joked that he'd married his work. The isolation didn't bother him. The stars had always been better company than most people he knew. Tonight was different. The storms had been interfering with his observations for weeks, but the atmospheric readings suggested a brief clearing was imminent. As he waited, Thomas reviewed his recent findings, unusual energy signatures that defied explanation, appearing and disappearing like cosmic ghosts. The rain suddenly ceased, and through the gap in the clouds, he saw it, a streak of silver-purple light cutting across the sky. It moved unlike anything he'd ever tracked before, making impossible turns that violated every law of physics he knew. His hands trembled as he adjusted the tracking system, heart pounding as the object descended rapidly toward the forest below. "This can't be happening," he whispered, already reaching for his emergency kit. Years of hiking these mountains had taught him to be prepared, though he'd never imagined using those skills to track down what could only be a crashed UFO. The descent through the rain-slicked trail was treacherous. Thomas's flashlight beam caught the gleam of wet leaves and rocks as he carefully made his way down the mountainside. The crash site wasn't hard to find, a strange, pulsing light leaked through the trees ahead, casting otherworldly shadows on the mist. He emerged into a small clearing and froze. Before him stood a vessel unlike anything he'd ever seen, its hull seeming to shift between solid and liquid states. More striking was the figure emerging from it, tall, graceful, and unmistakably not human. Her skin had a subtle iridescence, like mother of pearl, and her eyes glowed with an inner light that reminded him of distant nebulae. She moved with the fluid grace of a martial artist, but her obvious injuries marred her movements. When she spotted him, she raised what could only be a weapon, its surface crackling with energy. "Stay where you are," she commanded in perfect English, though her voice carried harmonic undertones that no human throat could produce. "I am Commander Nivera of the Stellar Guard, and you will identify yourself immediately." Thomas slowly raised his hands. Dawn broke over the observatory as Thomas helped Nivera carry salvaged components from her ship into his lab. They had worked through the night to conceal the vessel, using a combination of local foliage and what she called adaptive camouflage technology. Now, surrounded by the familiar chaos of his research equipment, Thomas watched as she interfaced alien technology with his computers in ways that made his head spin. "Your systems are primitive," Nivera said, her fingers dancing over a holographic display that hovered above his oldest laptop, "but they have potential." She paused, frowning at the stream of data. "There's something interfering with the artifact's signal. A form of electromagnetic distortion I've never encountered before." Thomas leaned closer, trying to make sense of the alien characters flowing across the screen. "Could it be related to the energy signatures I've been tracking? They started appearing about 3 months ago." Nivera's luminescent eyes narrowed. "Show me." As Thomas pulled up his research data, he couldn't help studying her profile. In the morning light, her iridescent skin shifted through subtle colors like the surface of a soap bubble. She moved with predatory grace even while injured, but there was something else in her bearing, a weight of responsibility that seemed to press down on her shoulders. "These patterns," she said suddenly, jabbing a finger at his screen. "They're not natural distortions. They're encrypted communications." Her expression darkened. "The syndicate is already here." "The syndicate?" Thomas asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the dread in her tone. "A coalition of outcasts and mercenaries from various systems. They seek the artifact for their own profit, caring nothing for the devastation its misuse could cause." She straightened, wincing slightly. "We must move quickly. Once they decode these energy signatures, they'll know exactly where to look." A sharp beeping from her wrist device interrupted them. Nivera's face went slack with shock as she read the message. "Impossible," she whispered. What is it? A transmission from my command. There. She swallowed hard, ordering me to terminate my mission and return immediately. But these authorization codes are wrong. They're perfect forgeries, but they're forgeries. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. Your command's been compromised. Worse, Nivera said, her voice hardening. This confirms what I've suspected since my last mission briefing. The corruption reaches into the highest levels of the Stellar Guard itself. Someone wants the artifact badly enough to destroy anyone who gets in their way, including their own people. She began pacing, her movements tight with tension. I need access to your planet's geological surveys. The artifact fragment emits a unique radiation signature that alters surrounding mineral deposits. If we cross-reference your atmospheric anomalies with underground formations. A loud crash from outside froze them both. Through the window, Thomas caught a glimpse of movement in the trees, something large and mechanical. They're here, Nivera hissed, pulling him away from the window. Hunter drones. Standard Syndicate advanced scouts. She pressed her weapon into his hands. Do you know how to shoot? I'm an astronomer, Thomas protested. The most dangerous thing I usually handle is a laser pointer. Then learn quickly, she replied, producing another weapon from somewhere in her suit. Setting 3 is stun, setting 5 is disrupt, don't touch setting 7 unless you want to vaporize everything in a 10-meter radius. That's reassuring, Thomas muttered, but he gripped the weapon tightly as they moved toward the lab's rear exit. The familiar corridors of his workplace had never seemed so threatening. They made it halfway to the emergency stairwell before the first drone burst through a window. It was a nightmare of chrome and sharp edges, hovering on near-silent propulsion fields. Thomas barely had time to register its presence before Nivera shoved him down, her weapon firing with a sound like tearing silk. The drone exploded in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Run, she commanded, and Thomas didn't argue. They sprinted down the stairs, the sound of more drones echoing through the building. As they reached the ground floor, Nivera suddenly stopped, her head tilting as if listening to something Thomas couldn't hear. What is it? He gasped, trying to catch his breath. That signal you detected? Her expression was grim. It's not just communications. They're using it to track the artifact's energy signature. And it's leading them. She pointed toward the mountain's base, there. The old mining complex, Thomas realized. It's been abandoned for decades. The university uses some of the tunnels for seismic monitoring equipment. Then that's where we're going, Nivera said, checking her weapon's charge. But we're not the only ones who know now. We'll have company. Thomas looked at the alien weapon in his hands, then at the determined warrior beside him. His quiet life of astronomical research seemed very far away. Just to be clear, he said as they moved toward the exit, when this is over, I expect full credit as co-author on any papers about first contact. A sound like crystal wind chimes emerged from Nivera, her version of laughter, he realized. If we survive this, Dr. Reed, I'll ensure your name is known across 12 star systems. I was actually just hoping for tenure, Thomas replied, and they slipped out into the morning light, racing against time and enemies they couldn't see, drawn deeper into a conspiracy that spanned the stars themselves. The entrance to the mining complex loomed before them, a dark maw in the mountainside partially hidden by decades of overgrowth. Thomas led Nivera through a maintenance access point he'd used for checking seismic equipment, their way lit by the ethereal glow of her energy weapon. The main tunnels branch into 3 levels, Thomas whispered as they moved deeper into the mountain. Most of the university's equipment is on level 2, but the deepest tunnels were closed off after a collapse in the 90s. The radiation signature is strongest below us, Nivera replied, consulting her wrist device. Your people's accident may have been more than natural causes. The implications of that statement hung heavy in the musty air. As they descended, the temperature dropped noticeably, their breath-forming clouds in the beam of Thomas's flashlight. The walls changed from rough-hewn rock to something smoother, almost glassy in places. "These patterns," Nivra muttered, running her hand along a section of wall. "Heat-fused silica. Something emerged here, long ago." A distant clang echoed through the tunnels, followed by the whir of mechanical servos. Thomas felt Nivra tense beside him, her pearlescent skin dimming to match the darkness around them, some kind of natural camouflage, he realized. "Syndicate ground forces," she breathed, barely audible. "They're sweeping the upper levels. We need to move faster." They pressed deeper into the complex, every shadow concealing potential threats. Thomas's scientific mind couldn't help but catalog the increasingly strange geological formations around them, crystalline structures that shouldn't exist at this depth, veins of unknown minerals that seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. An intersection loomed ahead, the tunnel splitting into 3 branches. Nivra's device flickered and sparked, its holographic display distorting wildly. "The energy signature is too strong," she hissed in frustration. "It's overloading my sensors." Thomas studied the tunnels, remembering years of research visits. "The eastern branch leads to a large cavern system. If something's affecting your equipment this strongly, that's our best bet." "Wait." Nivra caught his arm, her grip gentle but firm. "Before we go further, you need to understand what we might find. The artifact fragment, it's not just a power source or a weapon. It's a key to understanding consciousness itself. In the wrong hands, it could be used to enslave entire populations, to rewrite the very nature of free will." Thomas met her gaze, seeing the weight of galaxies in those luminescent eyes. "And in the right hands? It could bridge the gap between species, between minds. Create understanding where there was only fear." She paused, something vulnerable crossing her features. "That's why the Stellar Guard was founded, to protect such knowledge until all civilizations were ready to share it. But now the Guard itself is compromised," Thomas finished. "And you're trying to prevent a galactic dark age." "Not alone," she said softly, still holding his arm. The moment was shattered by the sound of energy weapons above them, followed by inhuman shrieks that made Thomas's blood run cold. "They've released the hunter-stalkers," Nivra said grimly. "Bioengineered tracking predators. They'll follow our scent." They ran, no longer trying to stay quiet. The eastern tunnel descended sharply, the strange mineral veins growing more numerous until the walls themselves seemed to glow with an inner fire. The air grew thick with an electric charge that made Thomas's hair stand on end. The tunnel opened suddenly into a vast cavern, and both of them stopped short in awe. Crystalline formations rose from floor to ceiling like frozen lightning, pulsing with colors that had no names in any human language. At the center, suspended in a column of light, hovered a fragment of something. Thomas's eyes couldn't quite focus on it. It seemed to exist in more dimensions than his mind could process. "There it is," Nivra breathed. "After all this time." But before they could reach it, shadows detached themselves from the cavern walls. Figures in sleek black armor materialized from what seemed like thin air, weapons trained on them. And at their center stood a towering figure whose very presence seemed to distort the space around him. "Commander Nivra," the figure's voice resonated on frequencies that made Thomas's teeth ache. "Thank you for leading us right to it. The Syndicate rewards those who serve it well, and punishes those who resist." Nivra's weapon snapped up, but she was surrounded. "Admiral Voss. I should have known you were behind this. How long have you been corrupting the Guard from within?" The Admiral's laugh was like grinding metal. "Corrupting? I'm evolving it. Why protect knowledge when we can use it? Think of the power we could wield, the order we could impose across the galaxy." "You mean the slaves you could create," Nivra spat. Thomas felt something then, a resonance from the artifact, a hum that vibrated in his bones. And somehow, he knew exactly what he had to do. His hand tightened on the weapon Nivera had given him, his thumb sliding to setting 7. "Hey, Admiral," he called out, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "You forgot something about Earth's mines." He raised the weapon, but not toward any of the Syndicate forces. Instead, he aimed at the ceiling above them, where centuries of mining had left the rock latticed with instabilities. "They're really unstable." Nivera's eyes widened as she realized his plan. In that split second before chaos erupted, their gazes met, and a lifetime of understanding passed between them. She smiled, a real smile, radiant as a newborn star, and raised her own weapon skyward. The cavern exploded into light and shadow, and the mountain began to move. The mountain didn't just collapse, it transformed. As energy weapons carved through ancient rock, the artifact's power surged outward in waves of impossible light. Crystalline formations exploded like frozen fireworks, their fragments suspended in mid-air as if gravity itself had forgotten its purpose. Time seemed to stretch and compress like taffy. Thomas felt Nivera grab his arm, pulling him behind a massive crystal formation as chaos erupted around them. Admiral Voss's forces opened fire, their weapons cutting through the darkness with lethal precision. But the artifact's energy field was disrupting everything, causing their shots to bend and twist in impossible ways. "The artifact's containment field is destabilizing," Nivera shouted over the din. "If it fully collapses, the resulting dimensional cascade could tear a hole in reality itself. Please tell me you have a plan that doesn't involve reality tearing." Thomas called back, ducking as another blast turned the crystal above them into singing shards. "I need to get closer to establish a resonance link," she said, her eyes tracking the shifting patterns of energy around the artifact. "But the Admiral's forces? Leave them to me." Thomas checked the charge on his weapon, trying to ignore the trembling in his hands. "I may not be a warrior, but I know every inch of these tunnels. I'll keep them busy." Nivera caught his face in her hands, her touch sending electric tingles across his skin. "Thomas, if you do this, the odds of survival are better than the odds of reality collapsing?" He managed a smile. "I'll take those chances." Something shifted in her luminescent eyes, an emotion he couldn't quite name but felt echoing in his own heart. Then she pressed something into his hand, a small crystal that pulsed in sync with her skin's iridescence. "A quantum beacon," she explained quickly. "No matter what happens, it will lead me back to you." Before he could respond, she was moving, her form blending with the shadows as she circled toward the artifact. Thomas took a deep breath, then stepped out from cover, firing his weapon at the cavern's weakest points. The Syndicate forces turned toward him, just as he'd hoped. "Come on, then," he shouted, diving behind a fallen column as return fire lit up the darkness. "Let me show you why you don't mess with Earth's scientists." What followed was a deadly game of cat and mouse through the crystalline maze. Thomas used every trick he'd learned from years of exploring these caves: false echoes, hidden passages, unstable ground that could collapse with a well-placed shot. He wasn't a soldier, but he was fighting for his home, his planet, and something more personal he wasn't ready to name. Through it all, he caught glimpses of Nivera making her way closer to the artifact, its light reflecting off her skin like living mercury. Admiral Voss noticed too, his massive form turning toward her with murderous intent. "You cannot stop evolution, Commander," the Admiral's voice boomed, distorted by the artifact's power. "The age of mere protection is over. We will reshape consciousness itself. The only consciousness you want to reshape is your own." Nivera shot back, her voice carrying harmonics that made the crystals sing. "You're afraid, Admiral, afraid of facing what you've become." Thomas saw his chance. While the Admiral was focused on Nivera, he targeted the ground beneath the Syndicate leader's feet. The blast turned solid rock into liquid glass, and for a moment, the mighty Admiral flailed like a puppet with cut strings. But Thomas's victory was short-lived. A stray shot from one of the Admiral's guards caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He slammed into a crystal formation, pain exploding through his body. As his vision blurred, he saw Nivera reach the artifact, her hands moving in complex patterns as she interfaced with its swirling energies. The quantum beacon in his pocket pulsed stronger, and suddenly he could feel what she was feeling, the vast potential of the artifact, the power to bridge minds across the gulf of species and space. But there was something else too, a darkness in the artifact's heart, a hunger that had driven the Admiral mad. Nivera, he tried to shout, but the words caught in his throat as reality itself seemed to bend around them. The artifact's light had become blinding, and in it, he saw multiple futures branching out like crystal formations, futures where the power was contained, where it was released, where it transformed everything it touched. Through their quantum link, he felt Nivera make her choice. The artifact's power could be neither contained nor destroyed, but it could be transformed. As consciousness itself hung in the balance, she began a process that would change not just the artifact, but herself and everything around her. The Admiral realized too late what she was doing. No, his voice shattered crystal formations as he lunged forward. You'll rob us of our destiny. Thomas found strength he didn't know he had, raising his weapon one last time. The only destiny you need to worry about, he growled, is your own. He fired on setting 7, not at the Admiral, but at the ceiling above him. As tons of rock came down, he caught a final glimpse of Vasa's face, perfect shock as his grand plans literally came crashing down. But Thomas barely registered the Admiral's fate. His attention was fixed on Nivera, her form now glowing with power that no being was meant to contain. Through their link, he felt her struggle, her determination, and her fear, not for herself, but for him. The quantum beacon burned in his pocket like a star, and Thomas Reed, the astronomer who had spent his life looking up at the stars, made his own choice. Fighting through the pain, he began to move toward the light, toward her, even as reality itself trembled on the edge of transformation. Light had a weight. Thomas felt it pressing against him as he fought his way toward Nivera, each step like moving through liquid diamond. The quantum beacon pulsed in perfect rhythm with his heartbeat, guiding him through the kaleidoscope of collapsing reality. Around them, the cavern had become a space between spaces, where the laws of physics were more like polite suggestions. Nivera stood at the heart of it all, her form both solid and ethereal as she channeled the artifact's power through herself. Through their quantum link, Thomas felt her consciousness expanding, touching minds across galaxies, weaving a web of understanding that transcended species and space. Stay back, her voice echoed in dimensions that shouldn't exist. The transformation. I can't control it much longer. Then don't try to control it, Thomas called out, pushing forward against the weight of warped spacetime. Share it. That's what you've been fighting for, isn't it? Not to control knowledge, but to share it. In the swirling energies around them, he glimpsed fragments of her memories, centuries of guarding ancient secrets, watching civilizations rise and fall, waiting for the moment when understanding could safely be shared. He saw her loneliness, matched so perfectly with his own lifetime of staring at unreachable stars. The Admiral was wrong, Thomas continued, nearly reaching her now. Evolution isn't about power or control. It's about adaptation, cooperation, finding new ways to survive together. The artifact's light pulsed brighter, and Thomas felt reality flex around them. Through their link, he sensed Nivera's struggle. If she released her hold on the power now, it would tear through the dimensional barriers like tissue paper. But trying to contain it would destroy her. Then he remembered something, a detail from his years of research that suddenly seemed vital. The observatory, he gasped. The telescope array, it's not just for looking at stars. It can channel and focus energy on a quantum level. If we could redirect the artifact's power through it. Nivera's eyes met his, understanding flowing between them faster than words could travel. It would need a focal point, she said, her voice strained. Someone to guide it. Good thing you have an astronomer handy. Thomas reached out, taking her hand. The contact sent shock waves through him, reality rippling outward from the point where they touched. Through their joined hands, he felt the vast potential of the artifact's power, no longer trapped in crystalline stasis but alive, evolving. Together, they began to move, fighting their way back through the tunnels as reality warped around them. The quantum beacon blazed between them, not just connecting their minds now but helping to stabilize the forces they were barely containing. Behind them, the cavern collapsed into dimensions beyond human comprehension, sealing away the Admiral and his forces in a space between spaces. They emerged from the mine into a dawn that had never seen before on Earth. The sky rippled with aurora-like waves of consciousness, as the artifact's power sought its new purpose. Thomas led them to the observatory, every step an act of will against forces that wanted to tear the universe apart. The telescope array stood waiting, its dishes pointed at the stars like mechanical flowers seeking light. As they reached the control center, Thomas's fingers flew over the familiar controls, recalibrating the array to receive rather than merely observe. "Ready?" he asked, looking at Nivera. Her iridescent skin was almost transparent now, the power within her seeking release. She smiled, and in that expression was every star he'd ever dreamed of reaching. "Together," she said. They joined hands again, and Thomas activated the array. The artifact's power surged through them, through the telescopes, and up into the cosmos. But instead of destruction, it became transformation. The quantum beacon's pulse spread outward, carrying with it understanding that transcended species, connecting minds across the gulf of space. Through their link, Thomas and Nivera felt it all, the wonder of first contact multiplied across 1,000 worlds, fear giving way to recognition, isolation becoming connection. The very barriers between consciousness began to shift, not breaking but becoming permeable, allowing sharing while preserving identity. When it was over, they stood in the observatory's dome, their hands still clasped, watching a new dawn spread across the sky. The artifact's physical form was gone, but its power lived on in the network of understanding it had created, connecting Earth to the wider galaxy in ways no one had imagined possible. "So," Thomas said finally, his voice rough. "Still think human technology is primitive?" Nivera's crystalline laugh echoed with harmonics that made his heart skip. "Perhaps I was hasty in my judgment. Your species has potential. High praise." He turned to face her fully. "What happens now? Will the Stellar Guard send someone to arrest us for unauthorized evolution of consciousness across multiple species?" "The Guard will have to evolve too," she said, her free hand tracing patterns in the air that left trails of light. "Everything will. But evolution is what life does best." She paused, her luminescent eyes meeting his. "I'll need to help guide that evolution. And I could use a partner who understands both the stars and the hearts of his people." Thomas looked at their joined hands, at the quantum beacon still pulsing softly between them. "Are you offering me a job, Commander?" "I'm offering you the universe, Dr. Reed." Her smile held all the mystery of deep space. "But we can start with the job." Outside, the sun rose on a changed Earth, its light catching the remnants of the aurora-like waves still rippling through the atmosphere. Humanity's first steps into a larger consciousness had been taken, guided by an alien warrior who had learned to trust and a stargazer who had found his answers closer than he'd ever imagined. The quantum beacon continued to pulse softly, no longer needed to connect their minds but keeping time with their hearts anyway, like a small star born in the space between two souls who had found each other across the vastness of space. Above them, the stars seemed closer somehow, more like neighbors than distant lights, and in the dawn of this new day, both Earth and the galaxy were awakening to possibilities that no one had dreamed possible. Thomas squeezed Nivera's hand gently. "So, partner, where do we start?" Her answer came with a smile that outshone the stars. "Everywhere.